The statement that you cannot serve two masters is not a moral warning meant to frighten or restrict you. It is a spiritual law revealing how consciousness itself functions. It speaks to the nature of allegiance within the human heart. Wherever your deepest trust rests, there your life flows. In earlier times, this teaching may have seemed simple, even obvious, but in this present age it has become profoundly relevant, because never before has humanity attempted to live with one foot in spiritual assurance and the other in constant anxiety over appearances. We say we trust God, yet we rise each morning calculating outcomes, guarding against loss, and bracing for disappointment. This divided loyalty produces a divided life. To serve two masters is to attempt to draw strength from two opposing sources. On one side stands the unseen presence, infinite, complete, self-sustaining, requiring no help from human planning. On the other side stands the world of form, measurements, predictions, and fear-driven strategies. These two cannot blend into a single path. When the mind turns toward the visible for safety, it quietly withdraws faith from the invisible. The result is not balance but inner conflict. The soul becomes restless because it was never designed to live by calculation and trust at the same time. In our modern world, the pressure to serve two masters has intensified. Technology promises control, information promises security, and constant connectivity promises relevance. Yet beneath these promises lies exhaustion. People know more than ever yet trust less. They plan endlessly yet feel unsafe. This is the symptom of a consciousness attempting to serve spirit while bowing to fear. Fear always demands proof before peace, while truth offers peace before proof. The moment you demand visible assurance before resting inwardly, you have already chosen which voice you will obey. The true master is revealed in moments of crisis. When lack appears, when health trembles, when relationships shake, observe where the mind runs first. Does it turn inward to quiet listening or outward to frantic solutions? The master you serve is not declared by words, prayers, or beliefs, but by the direction of your attention. What you consult for guidance rules you. What you rely upon for peace governs you. This is why serving two masters is impossible. The heart cannot rest in two directions at once. The teaching is not asking you to abandon the world, but to abandon the belief that the world is your source. You may work, plan, and act, but not as a servant of fear. When action flows from inner alignment rather than anxiety, it no longer competes with faith. But when action is driven by panic, it becomes a rival god. This is where many sincere seekers struggle, because they want spiritual peace without releasing worldly dependence. Yet peace only enters when the throne of consciousness is occupied by one authority. To choose one master is not loss, it is liberation. The moment the heart stops negotiating between trust and fear, a deep stillness emerges. In that stillness, guidance becomes natural, provision becomes effortless, and life regains harmony. The world may remain noisy, uncertain, and demanding, but you are no longer ruled by it. This is why the message is more relevant than ever. In an age of endless options, voices, and distractions, the soul is quietly longing for a single allegiance, a single source, and a single resting place within. The divided consciousness is the hidden cause of nearly every form of inner unrest, yet it often goes unnoticed because it disguises itself as responsibility, wisdom, or realism. A divided consciousness occurs when the mind attempts to live in two opposing states at the same time, acknowledging a higher spiritual order while simultaneously submitting to fear, appearance, and human reasoning. It is not that a person openly rejects spiritual truth, but that they reserve trust, holding it back for emergencies, conditions, and visible confirmation. This inner division creates a subtle tension that never fully resolves because consciousness cannot flow freely in two directions at once. When awareness is divided, peace becomes conditional. Calm exists only when circumstances cooperate, finances appear stable, health feels secure, or relationships seem intact. The moment any of these shift, anxiety rises, revealing that trust was never placed fully in the unseen source but in the stability of form. This produces a cycle where faith is spoken yet fear is practiced. The individual believes in divine care but lives as though survival depends on constant mental effort, control, and anticipation of danger. The strain of maintaining this split exhausts the soul, even when life appears outwardly successful. A unified consciousness, by contrast, does not alternate between trust and doubt. It rests in a single center. When consciousness is whole, it does not deny human experience, but it does not grant it authority. Conditions may change, but they no longer command emotional allegiance. In a divided state, the mind asks, "What if?" and waits for reassurance. In an undivided state, the heart listens inwardly and responds from quiet certainty. This difference determines whether life feels like a struggle or a movement carried by something greater than personal effort. Much of modern stress arises not from external pressure, but from the attempt to reconcile spiritual truth with fear-based thinking. People want to trust God while also trusting backup plans, safeguards, and worst-case scenarios, yet every backup plan rooted in fear subtly announces mistrust. Consciousness registers this contradiction even when the intellect justifies it. The result is inner noise, because the mind is receiving two instructions at once. One says, rest, all is well, while the other says, stay alert, something may go wrong. No system can function peacefully under opposing commands. The divided consciousness also blocks spiritual perception. Truth is revealed in stillness, but stillness cannot emerge where fear is rehearsed. When the mind is constantly scanning for threats, it becomes deaf to inner guidance. This is why many seek answers yet feel disconnected. They pray, affirm, and study, but inwardly remain vigilant, guarding against disappointment. This vigilance becomes a form of worship, giving authority to uncertainty instead of presence. Wholeness begins when consciousness no longer negotiates with fear. It is not achieved by effort, but by surrendering the belief that safety comes from personal control. When the heart quietly releases its divided loyalty, a deeper order asserts itself not through force, but through calm assurance, gently reorganizing thought, perception, and experience from the inside out. The conflict between trusting the invisible and depending on visible systems defines much of modern spiritual struggle. On the surface, visible systems appear reliable because they can be measured, monitored, and adjusted. Money, credentials, networks, technology, and planning offer a sense of control that feels tangible. The invisible, however, offers no such sensory reassurance. It cannot be tracked or predicted, and because of this, the human mind often treats it as secondary, something to believe in emotionally while reserving real dependence for what can be seen. Yet this reversal of order is precisely where inner instability begins. Trust in the invisible is not blind belief or passive hope. It is an inner orientation that recognizes a sustaining intelligence prior to form. When reliance shifts toward visible systems as the primary source of security, the invisible is unconsciously demoted to a supporting role. It becomes something we ask to bless our plans rather than something we allow to guide them. This subtle shift has profound consequences. The mind becomes overactive, constantly adjusting, predicting, and protecting because visible systems are inherently unstable. Markets change, bodies age, relationships shift, and technology fails. Depending on these for peace creates a life of continual vigilance. Fear enters not because visible systems are wrong, but because they were never meant to be masters. They are tools, expressions, and channels, but not sources. The moment they are treated as sources, anxiety becomes logical. One must guard what is believed to sustain life. This is why people who appear materially secure can be inwardly terrified of loss. Their peace is tethered to something that can be taken away. Trust in the invisible, by contrast, does not fluctuate with conditions because it is not derived from them. It rests in something that precedes gain and survives loss. The difficulty lies in the demand for proof. The human mind says, I will trust when I see results. The invisible says, rest first, and clarity will follow. These two approaches cannot operate together. When proof is required before peace, peace never arrives. When peace is allowed without proof, perception changes, and guidance becomes evident. This does not mean visible systems disappear, rather they fall into proper alignment. Action becomes calmer, decisions become simpler, and effort becomes more effective because it is no longer driven by fear. Modern life constantly pressures individuals to prioritize visible assurance. From an early age, success is defined by measurable outcomes and worth is tied to performance. In this environment, trusting the invisible feels irresponsible or naive. Yet the deepest instability comes from ignoring it. Without inner anchoring, every external change becomes a threat. The soul is pulled back and forth by circumstances, unable to rest. True trust does not reject practical action, it purifies it. When dependence shifts inward, action flows from clarity rather than desperation. One no longer asks, how can I secure my future, but listens for what is being revealed now. In this listening, life unfolds with less resistance, because it is no longer being forced into safety by human will, but guided by a deeper order that was always present, quietly waiting for recognition. Fear is the most honest revealer of allegiance because it bypasses language, belief, and intention, exposing what the heart actually serves. In moments of calm, it is easy to claim trust in higher guidance, to speak of faith, surrender, and confidence in divine order. But when fear arises, it strips away these declarations and reveals where reliance truly rests. Fear does not ask permission before appearing, it surfaces instinctively, and in doing so, it points directly to the master being consulted for safety. When fear dominates a situation, the mind immediately begins searching for control. It runs to strategies, defenses, explanations, and worst-case scenarios. This reaction shows that peace was resting on conditions rather than on inner certainty. If trust were rooted in something unchanging, fear would not command such authority. It might still appear briefly, but it would not dictate action. Fear becomes powerful only when it is believed to be a necessary guide. At that point, it is no longer an emotion, it is a ruler. Many people attempt to fight fear with affirmations, reasoning, or distraction, but these methods often fail because they address fear as an intruder rather than a signal. Fear is not the problem, it is the indicator. It reveals that consciousness has placed its confidence in something fragile. When the object of trust is threatened, fear arises naturally to protect it. This is why fear intensifies around money, health, reputation, and relationships. These are areas where people most often seek security. Fear simply announces that the heart has crowned a temporary condition as a source. The revealing power of fear can be uncomfortable, but it is also merciful. It brings hidden loyalties to the surface. Without fear, divided allegiance might remain unnoticed. A person may sincerely believe they are living by faith while silently depending on outcomes. Fear exposes this inner contradiction. It shows that two masters are being consulted, one offering peace without conditions, and the other demanding constant attention, effort, and protection. In modern life, fear is often normalized and even praised. Worry is called responsibility. Anxiety is framed as preparedness. Constant concern is treated as intelligence. In this atmosphere, fear is rarely questioned. It is obeyed. Yet every time fear is obeyed, it strengthens its authority. The mind learns that fear is necessary for survival and trust is postponed indefinitely. This creates a cycle where peace is always delayed until circumstances improve, but circumstances never improve enough to silence fear. Recognizing fear as a revealer rather than a guide changes the entire relationship with it. Instead of reacting, one can observe where trust has been misplaced. This observation alone begins to dissolve fear's power. When the heart quietly withdraws its allegiance from appearances and returns it inward, fear loses its foundation. It no longer has a throne to sit on. Fear cannot rule where trust is singular. It thrives only in divided consciousness. When allegiance is unified, fear may knock, but it is not invited in. The moment the heart stops asking fear for direction, it naturally turns toward a deeper stillness, and in that stillness, fear fades, not because it was fought, but because it was no longer needed. The modern world rarely asks people to worship obvious idols, yet it constantly invites devotion to subtle ones that appear reasonable, responsible, and even virtuous. Security, approval, and control have quietly taken the place of overt idols, not through ritual, but through mental and emotional attachment. These are not objects placed on altars, they are expectations placed on life. They demand loyalty, time, and emotional energy, and in return they promise safety, belonging, and certainty. Yet they never truly deliver what they promise, which is why they must be continually served. Security has become one of the most powerful modern idols. It disguises itself as wisdom and planning, but beneath it lies fear of the unknown. People are taught that safety comes from accumulation, preparation, and insulation from risk. While practical care has its place, the obsession with security reveals a deeper mistrust of life itself. When security is treated as a master, peace is always postponed. There is always one more safeguard to build, one more contingency to prepare for, one more scenario to fear. The soul never rests because the idol of security is never satisfied. Approval operates just as quietly and just as powerfully. In a connected world, identity is increasingly shaped by visibility and validation. Likes, recognition, praise, and acceptance become measures of worth. When approval is the master, truth is compromised. People begin to edit themselves, not according to inner conviction, but according to external response. This creates a divided inner life, where the heart knows one thing but performs another. The cost of this devotion is authenticity. Peace cannot coexist with constant self-adjustment, because the self is always waiting to see how it will be received. Control is perhaps the most convincing idol because it presents itself as competence. Control promises freedom from uncertainty, yet it is born from the belief that uncertainty is dangerous. When control is enthroned, the mind becomes hyperactive, attempting to manage outcomes, people, and timing. This effort produces exhaustion, not mastery. Life resists being controlled, and the more control is exerted, the more resistance is felt. The idol demands constant attention because any lapse feels like vulnerability. These idols are subtle because they are socially rewarded. A person devoted to security is called prudent. A person devoted to approval is called likable. A person devoted to control is called capable. Yet inwardly, these devotions fracture consciousness. They divide loyalty between inner guidance and external conditions. One voice says, "Be still and trust," while another says, "Manage everything or risk collapse." The result is inner noise, tension, and spiritual fatigue. Serving these modern idols does not mean rejecting faith, it means postponing it. Trust is delayed until security is sufficient, approval is guaranteed, or control is established. But these conditions never fully arrive. The idols keep their servants busy, anxious, and dependent. They promise peace in the future but demand fear in the present. Freedom begins when these idols are recognized, not condemned but seen clearly. They lose power when they are no longer mistaken for sources. When the heart releases its devotion to security, approval, and control, it does not fall into chaos, it falls into alignment. In that alignment, action becomes wiser, relationships become freer, and life unfolds with less resistance, because the soul is no longer bowing to masters that cannot sustain it. Serving truth while negotiating with illusion is an inner contradiction that cannot be sustained, because truth requires wholeness, while illusion survives through division. Truth does not argue, defend itself, or compete for attention. It simply is. Illusion, on the other hand, demands constant engagement. It feeds on reaction, fear, and interpretation. When consciousness attempts to honor truth while still bargaining with appearances, it quietly hands authority back to illusion, because negotiation itself implies doubt. Negotiation with illusion often looks reasonable. It says, I believe in divine order, but what if this situation is different? Or, I trust in higher guidance, but I must prepare for the worst. These statements appear cautious, yet they reveal a divided allegiance. Truth is being acknowledged verbally, while illusion is being consulted emotionally. The heart is not resting, it is hedging. In this state, truth is treated as an ideal, not as a governing reality. Illusion operates through appearances, and appearances always change. When consciousness negotiates with them, it accepts their claim to authority. It begins to ask conditions for peace, timelines for relief, and signs for reassurance. This keeps the mind in constant dialogue with uncertainty. Truth cannot fully reveal itself in such a climate because its language is stillness, not debate. As long as the mind is engaged in negotiating outcomes, it is unavailable for revelation. Many sincere seekers fall into this pattern because they confuse spiritual understanding with mental agreement. They accept truth intellectually but continue to emotionally respond to illusion. This creates frustration because they feel they know better, yet still suffer. The suffering does not come from lack of knowledge but from divided loyalty. Truth is not something that works when conditions allow. It functions when it is allowed to be final. The impossibility of serving both becomes evident when decisions must be made. If truth is consulted, action arises from clarity, simplicity, and peace. If illusion is consulted, action arises from urgency, fear, and overcomplication. Attempting to combine the two results in paralysis. The mind waits for certainty while refusing to release control. This state produces neither wisdom nor rest. Illusion always promises protection through engagement. It says, stay alert, analyze more, prepare further. Truth offers protection through alignment, not effort. To the mind conditioned by fear, this feels risky. Letting go of negotiation feels like surrendering control. Yet control was never real, it was only the appearance of safety. True safety does not come from managing outcomes, but from being anchored beyond them. When negotiation ends, illusion loses its voice. It does not disappear dramatically, it simply fades from relevance. Appearances may still arise, but they are no longer treated as authorities. They become information, not identity. Truth then moves from concept to experience. Peace ceases to be a goal and becomes a state. This is why serving truth demands exclusivity. Not because illusion is powerful, but because attention is. Whatever consciousness gives its attention to governs its experience. When attention is no longer split, truth does not need to be defended or proven. It expresses itself naturally, quietly reshaping perception and experience from within, leaving no room for the strain of negotiation or the confusion of divided service. Inner surrender is often misunderstood as weakness, resignation, or passivity, yet in reality it is the most decisive act of spiritual authority. It is not the collapse of will, but the release of false will, the willingness to stop asserting personal control over a life that was never meant to be managed from the surface of thought. Inner surrender does not mean giving up responsibility. It means relinquishing the belief that peace and order depend on constant mental effort. This shift opens a doorway through which a deeper intelligence can operate without obstruction. As long as the mind insists on directing outcomes, it remains burdened by fear of error, loss, and delay. Control appears necessary because trust feels uncertain. Surrender removes this tension by changing the center of authority. Instead of asking, how can I make this work? Consciousness rests in a quiet listening that asks, what is being revealed now? This listening is not passive. It is alert, receptive, and grounded. From it arises action that is appropriate rather than anxious, timely rather than forced. Peace does not enter through effort. Effort can create movement, but it cannot create rest. Inner surrender creates peace because it dissolves resistance. Resistance is the belief that life must be pushed, fixed, or defended against. When resistance fades, peace emerges naturally, not as an emotional high, but as a steady assurance beneath circumstances. This peace does not depend on outcomes because it is not produced by them. It exists prior to resolution and often becomes the very condition through which resolution appears. Spiritual authority is born from this peace. Authority does not mean dominance over people or events, it means alignment with a deeper order that carries its own power. When consciousness is surrendered inwardly, fear loses its leverage. Decisions become simpler because they are no longer negotiated through anxiety. Words carry weight because they are not reactive. Presence itself becomes influential, not through force but through clarity. This is why those who have truly surrendered often appear calm in situations that unsettle others. They are not detached from life, they are anchored within it. Modern culture equates surrender with failure because it glorifies self-determination and control, yet this glorification has produced widespread exhaustion. The soul was not designed to bear the weight of omnipotence. Inner surrender lifts that burden. It restores order by allowing life to be governed from its true source rather than from the surface mind. In surrender, one does not lose direction, one gains guidance. One does not become inactive, one becomes precise. This surrender is not a one-time event, but a continual orientation. Each moment invites the choice between asserting control or yielding to inner stillness. Each choice shapes experience. When surrender becomes habitual, peace stabilizes. Life may still present challenges, but they no longer threaten identity or worth. They are met from a place of quiet strength rather than defensive urgency. The doorway opened by inner surrender does not lead away from life, but into it more deeply. Through that doorway flows wisdom without strain, provision without fear, and authority without aggression. What emerges is not a weaker self but a truer one, unburdened by divided allegiance and free to move in harmony with the order that has always been present, patiently waiting to be trusted. The message that you cannot serve two masters is not a warning of punishment, but a revelation of how life functions at its deepest level. It explains why so many sincere people feel torn, exhausted, and inwardly conflicted despite their desire for faith and peace. The strain does not come from life itself but from divided allegiance. When consciousness is split between trust and fear, between inner knowing and outer dependence, harmony becomes impossible. The soul was never designed to move in two directions at once. Throughout this reflection, one truth becomes clear: whatever claims authority over peace becomes a master. Whether it is fear, security, approval, control, or visible systems, anything consulted for safety before inner stillness takes the throne of consciousness. This does not happen through deliberate rebellion, but through habit. The modern world subtly trains the mind to rely on appearances, measurements, and outcomes, while relegating trust to theory. Yet theory cannot carry the weight of living. Only lived alignment can. The relevance of this teaching today lies in the intensity of distraction and pressure. Never before has humanity been so informed, so connected, and yet so inwardly unsettled. The constant demand to predict, prepare, and protect has normalized anxiety and crowned it as wisdom. In this environment, the call to singular trust sounds radical, even dangerous, yet it is precisely this singularity that restores balance. When trust is unified, fear loses its voice, not because it is suppressed, but because it is no longer needed. Serving one master does not mean rejecting responsibility or ignoring the world. It means reordering authority. The world becomes a place of expression, not a source of identity or safety. Action continues, but it flows from clarity rather than desperation. Decisions are made, but they are guided by inner assurance instead of pressure. In this alignment, life becomes less forced and more coherent, because it is no longer being managed by a divided mind. The heart of this teaching is surrender, not as loss but as liberation. Surrender ends the exhausting attempt to negotiate with uncertainty. It releases the belief that peace must be earned through control or guaranteed by conditions. In surrender, consciousness rests where it was always meant to rest, in a presence that does not fluctuate with circumstance. From this resting place, true authority emerges, quiet yet firm, gentle yet unshakable. When the soul ceases to serve two masters, it does not become passive, it becomes powerful in a new way. It no longer reacts blindly to appearances, but responds wisely from within. Life may still bring change, but change no longer brings collapse. Challenges may arise, but they do not dethrone peace. This is not escape from the world, but freedom within it. The invitation of this teaching is simple yet profound: choose where your trust lives. Not in words, not in intention, but in moment-to-moment reliance. When that choice is made fully, without reservation, the inner conflict dissolves, and life begins to move with a quiet certainty that no external master could ever provide.